have been so many great interviews that have given us better insight to the second episode of the final season, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. So this video, I want to go over the coolest reveals. And by coolest reveals, I mean coolest to me, so that's a low bar. First, and I feel most important because I absolutely agree with him, Bryan Cogman, the writer for the second episode, said that this episode was a love letter to these characters. He explained, "This episode is really a love letter to the characters. With most our battles, you get about 15 minutes of calm before the storm, with the characters participating in that battle, taking stock of where they are in their lives before the dam breaks. This is an entire episode of that, so that episode 3 can hit the ground running." I'm personally so thankful that we got this episode. I know not everyone agrees. I feel like there's a good portion of people that absolutely hated it. I don't know. I'm in love with this episode. It's my favorite episode in a while. Cogman also shared that this episode was meant to give us a breath of fresh air or a chance to catch our breath before the chaos of episode 3, explaining, "There was such a breakneck pace to season 7 that I was delighted when the showrunners proposed an episode of just spending time with characters in this space. I think it will make episode 3, which is spectacular, all the richer. The moment that episode 3 starts, we're in full 100% battle mode." Cold open into the battle for episode 3? Probably. Brace yourself. Next, originally this scene was going to be a bit more contrived, so instead of the little girl that had Shireen's facial scars just appearing, Bryan Cogman wrote the scene so both Davos and Gilly got to talking about how they both were taught to read by Shireen. However, D&D, the showrunners came in and changed the scene to flow a bit better. Cogman stated, "The short little scene with Davos and Gilly tending to refugees streaming into Winterfell. They encounter a girl with half her face scarred who bears a resemblance to Stannis Baratheon's sacrificed daughter, Shireen. The name Shireen is not said in the scene, but Shireen taught both Davos and Gilly how to read. This is an example of how brilliant showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss are. I wrote a scene where Davos and Gilly get on the subject of knowing how to read and then get on the subject of Shireen and how she taught them both. It was the right inspiration, but it felt contrived. With the showrunner's notes, it evolved into this where the scene is absolutely about Shireen, but neither of them are aware of the impact she had on the other. It was such a beautiful way of acknowledging all these threads between all these characters that many of them are not aware of, and never will be aware of. Only we as the audience have the privilege of being aware of them." While I like the way they did it in this episode, I agree the talking about Shireen both teaching them to read was probably a little too heavy-handed. I feel like they were a little bit too intense on the crypts are safe. The crypts are safe. You should go in the crypts. The crypts are safe. Guess what, everyone? The crypts aren't going to be safe. Come on. We're not that dumb. You don't need to beat us over the head with it. However, that last little bit about how the Watchers only know some of the connections and threads that bind these characters together was really cool. See? They do care. Next, let's talk about Jaime's trial because we learned a couple fun things about it. First, it was supposed to mimic Tyrion's trial. Cogman explained, "This was not unlike the trial episode I adapted with Tyrion in season 4. It was a chance to revisit Jaime's arc and the different perspectives that they have about him. Brienne's perspective mirrors the audience. One thing I have to remind myself is that not everyone on Game of Thrones is watching Game of Thrones. The characters only know what they know, and they only know their own experiences. But the natural thing for you to want to say is, they're both good guys. Just put aside your differences." What's fun about Brienne's testimony is she's the only character who's bore witness to the amazing changes Jaime's gone through over the course of the season. Apart from Tyrion, who has his own reasons for loving his brother and knowing he's different than how he's perceived. Personally, I also love the dialogue between Jaime and Bran in front of the Godswood, and Bran letting him know, yeah, if you hadn't pushed me out that window, you would still be the awful person you were. And I wouldn't be the person I am now, which is the person that hopefully is going to save all our asses. So I just feel like that was a powerful moment and relevant nowadays, where we forget that just because people did shitty things in their past doesn't mean they're not a good person now, and that we can all grow and we need to learn to forgive others and ourselves.
But we learn more about the trial, such as how they purposely talked about sitting positions at the Winterfell leadership table. Jon was center in episode 1 because he was rallying the troops to get behind Dany. Dany has the center position in episode 2 because she has the queen position. Amelia said that the trial was fueled by the fact no one wanted Dany in the north, and Dany wanted to show them this is how she works, which kind of blew up in her face when she got outnumbered. However, because this is right after Jon figured out who his biological parents are, he isn't really in the room in a sense during the trial, according to the writer. On Brienne, oh boy, we are told she is definitely in love with Jaime and she feels things she can't process for him. Brienne, a shy person, putting herself in front of that room to protect Jaime was like a declaration of love, according to the writer. And perhaps a declaration, according to the showrunners, that she doesn't quite understand or grasp quite yet.
Okay, I'm probably one of millions of people that loved Jenny's song at the end of the episode, but Bryan Cogman also gave us more information on why they picked the song and such, saying,
"Songs have been important in the past on the show, but they're more present in George R.R. Martin's books. Pod once again surprises us when we find out he has a lovely singing voice. It was fun to find a reason to get Jenny of Old Stones, aka Jenny's song, in there in a way that feels organic and appropriate. It's not something we normally do, but I think it works. Dan wrote the bulk of the lyrics about it being warm and having fellowship together and how they wish it could last longer, but it's not going to."
Also, Patrick's actor had no idea that the showrunners knew he had a good voice, so what else did the showrunners know about the actors that they don't know they know? Spooky. Next, we got some fun information on the library that Dany and Sansa met in, the art director shared.
"I wanted to make it look slightly different from all the libraries that we've done before. You know, they're not great readers in Winterfell."
Ouch, that kind of felt like a Winterfell diss. Dang.
Though they also wanted us to know that there were some sick direwolf carvings in the library, so hopefully you noticed those. Oh, and Bryan Cogman also wants you to know in regards to this scene, "Sansa thinks of the North in every way that Dany thinks of Westeros. The North is hers. It's the Starks. It's theirs."
That makes sense, and I love how protective she is of the North. I feel like given how they're making Sansa, she should be the person in charge of the North at the end of this series, because obviously she's going to live with how OP they're making her now.
Through the Inside the Episode, we also got a better look at dragonglass logs they have ready to drop on the invading dead. This is going to be so much fun to watch, though from the trailers we know the undead do make it over the walls. On this epic conversation between Bran and Jaime, where Bran says,
"How do you know there is an afterwards?"
Nikolai shared what Bran was thinking, stating, "Well, Bran can see the past, and I think based on all his knowledge, he's clearly open to the possibility we won't prevail, that we won't win. And I think Jaime obviously thinks this kid is disturbing on many levels, but what he says there is not what you want to hear. It would kind of be nice if he could say, well, when the battle is over, we'll have a second discussion about this. But that's not what he says. He just says, listen, you're probably gonna die. Keep that option open now."
Personally, I didn't find what he said to Jaime as an indication that he'll die during the battle, and I don't care what anyone says. I feel like Bran has a little bit of his old sass coming through from time to time, and I love it. Lastly, David Benioff said that he loved the Tormund chugging goat milk scene, and the knighting scene was such a favorite of theirs, they decided to name the entire episode after it. So of course, I want to share some facts about the knighting scene, starting with Nikolai, who shared,
"It's a real thing in that world, and I also think that he's happy to do that. I mean, it's clearly a woman that he has enormous admiration for, and just a human being that he admires. And we saw a scene earlier in the episode where he asks if he can serve under her, because he knows she is amazing at what she does, and she's a great warrior, and she has all the qualities, and is most deserving of the title of knight of anyone in that world. So I think it's obviously an act of love. And I don't think he thought of it, but then when you hear Tormund Giantsbane go, well, why can't a woman be a knight? And then she goes, tradition, and he says, fuck tradition. It kind of, I think, inspires him that moment. It's a beautiful scene, and when I saw it yesterday, because we're not allowed to see anything, I just thought Gwendolyn was absolutely incredible. I mean, it was incredible when we shot it, but you do so many takes and so many angles, so to see the final performance was just beautiful.
However, Nikolai enjoyed the entire group together in general, saying,
"Just shooting that sequence, we had a great time because it is that silence before the storm, and also, in many ways, we've all spent a lot of time together, so that influenced the scene." I also think Bryan Cogman, the writer of this episode, he really captured how this could very well be the last time we see all these characters. And there were so many wonderful surprises. The surprise of Daniel having such an amazing voice. It really was just a special sequence, and then the director, David Nutter, just capturing it and the balance there. It never becomes too sentimental. It has a sentimental tone about it because you kind of know we're probably all going to die tomorrow. And that's not a spoiler, that's just the truth. We could very well all die, and he captured that beautifully.
Really, this episode and how they played all the relationships and the conversations and everything that went down was so beautiful and so respectful, and I'm so grateful we got this episode. So that is some of the best look into this episode we have so far. I'm sure as the weeks roll on, we'll get more and more info.